We are here today in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey peoples. I ask you to join us in acknowledging their communities and their elders, both past and present, as well as their future generations. NSCAD University also acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. This acknowledgement reflects the university's commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing processes and legacies of settler colonialism. I'd also ask that you join us in recognizing the loss of the African Nova Scotian community of Africville and its history of civic neglect and misappropriation. As an educational institution, NSCAD recognizes its ethical obligation to create truthful and factual representations. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. My name is Dr. Peggy Shannon, and I am the president of NSCAD University. And it really is such a thrill to welcome you all to the second annual NSCAD University Film Festival presented by TD Insurance. To kick off this festival, we are pleased to present an artist talk and an industry panel. Today's talk and panel feature some of our talented alumni, including Oscar-winning filmmaker John Kahrs, who graduated with his BFA in 1990, who is with us today from Los Angeles, where he lives and works, and who will be interviewed by our faculty member, Becca Barker, who is also a graduate, a BFA graduate from the year 2000. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your experiences today. And Becca, over to you to introduce John.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for coming today. This is billed as a sort of informal conversation, and so that's what I am ready to have. This is John Kahrs.
Hi, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to NSCAD and Kara and Peggy and Becca to invite me here. This is great. I haven't been here in 32 years.
I was going to ask, when was the last time you were in Halifax?
32 years ago.
Yeah.
I think I came back to see an ex-girlfriend or something like in 91 or 92. So It has been a while. A lot of it has not changed much, but a lot has changed dramatically. So
yeah, you were walking around a little
really
bit
nice.
earlier. And
I was wandering around being nostalgic. So it's good. The school is like preserved. The painting studios are exactly the same. They're just thicker coats of paint on every surface, I think. So, But yeah, it's great.
I'm excited to meet you finally and to talk a bit about the trajectory of your career and sort of connecting it back to your time here.
Yeah.
And where you've gone. We have a lot of students with us here too, who I'm sure are keen to hear, what happens when you finish with an art degree.
Yeah.
I imagine NSCAD when you were here was quite different from a lot of things now, although I guess the painting studios remain the same.
Yeah. I mean, the weird thing was that I was jumping all around to so many different departments. Like I'd go into the photography darkroom and like just develop negatives, and they're like, yeah, I guess you can. And then I would. And then I was in metalsmithing, I was in painting, I was going to major in sculpture with John Greer. And then I discovered they had a computer animation department just tucked in the back of the computer wing. And I was like, what's going on here? Because the context for the time is like, if you see Tron in 1982, you're like, how is that done? This is the only thing happening in computer animation. I'm totally obsessed with it. I'm making flip books of like rotating cylinders and cubes and stuff. Like I wanted to do this, but I didn't see any pathway to get there. So I'm going to art school trying everything, but I'm still obsessed with animation. So then when I found it, I'm like, okay, I'm clearing all of my curriculum to do this. And I basically lived in that studio like almost 24/7 for about 2 more semesters. So, but I think the school gave me a really good, foundation, literally the foundation years, but all of the skills that they treat you about, that they give you, that they teach you, are all the underpinnings that you bring to your work as you go into the world and do what you're going to do. Like, this composition is bad. This is good. This is, things like that.
We are definitely going to talk about where that took you later on, including the Academy Award, winning film Paperman, which we are screening tomorrow night at the film festival here. But your sort of journey through NSCAD, sort of starting with your beginnings, back to that, sounds very, very familiar to me. I had a similar kind of experience, but more importantly, I think this is what I see with students time and time again when they come into, I teach introduction to animation, and in that introduction course, often we have students who come from all different disciplines, not only students who come here drawing and illustrating and geared towards character animation, but students from sculpture, students from textiles, students from painting who just want to try to make something move. And that foundation collectively of all those different practices and different kinds of material knowledge, I find the students often sort of feed off each other in a really exciting way. Yeah. Was that akin to your experience, sort of, when you found?
Because I'm like a serial hobbyist, right? Like I get obsessed and then I move on to another thing and then I keep going from one thing to another. And I was just thinking about, in the painting studios, there's this one guy. He was basically like, I love Group of Seven, and I'm going to be one of those guys, and I'm going to do plein air painting, and I'm going to finish them in the studio. And that's all he did. And that was his vibe. And he lived to do that. And I was basically the opposite of that. I'm like, I want to try everything that is possible to do in this art school. And I think the environment was very welcoming to that, and probably still is. Like, I wasn't a photography student, but they let you go and, how to develop? All right, go, just don't mess it up, kind of thing. And so I was in metalsmithing and I was all over the place. But I think even years later, I still think of how, whether it's music or art or the craftsmanship of art making, all this stuff in the new Rick Rubin book, it's all that stuff that you learn, and it just keeps applying and looping around and be this valuable kind of like foundational stuff that you learn about what it is to create, what it is to make art, and what happens when it goes out into the world and you're part of this river of creativity of people doing stuff, and you're in it, swimming in it, doing stuff with them. And I love that. So that all became the food which fed me for the next, for the rest of my career. It continues to. So
it sounds like staying sort of attuned to your surroundings in that way is really has been very important for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting that you mentioned Tron as an example, sort of early on, from when you're describing your own student sort of curiosity, maybe coming to animation and starting with the sort of computer rendering, drawing. What would that area have been called at that time at NSCAD? Just the computer? I mean,
it was just the computer department.
Yeah.
But they had some brand new machines and some so-so software that was just emerging at the time that allowed you to like even try to do it. And also I just think that there was only like 2 or 3 people in the entire world that were doing character animation that was like kind of based on this Disney legacy of like, what are the fundamentals of animation? And what's interesting is the book, The Illusion of Life, which is sort of the Bible for animation that the Disney animators put out in, I think, the 80s. I think Katzenberg took that out of print, maybe, or somehow it was just not accessible to me. So everything I learned was kind of from this like sideways.
Mhm.
Like, if I had that book, I'd be like, I think I'd be better now if I had it back then. But I was like learning it all myself. And I think I didn't really have a lot of supervision. Daniel Potvin, who was running that little group of animation students, was just like, yeah, go do whatever you want. So it was like a journey of self-discovery, really.
Mhm.
But and then I was out in the world trying to find work, and there wasn't much to be had. I was like cold calling people. That was dumb too. Because I was just obsessed with like, I should have been like sending everything out to a lot more places, but I'd get obsessed with, if someone said, yeah, maybe, I'd obsess on the maybe for way too long and annoy the hell out of them. Like, no, we're not going to hire you. Just say that to me. But as a kid, I was like, are you going to? And, but they had no intention of it. So I just learned to read the codes after a while. But yeah, I did cold call Blue Sky, and Chris Wedge was like, no, you can't come down here. I'm just kidding. You can come down. How about Wednesday? And then I just started working for free there, and then started working on television commercials and learning just how to be a person in the world working.
Yeah. This is why I thought Tron was an interesting example, because there's a
He
connection
worked
to
on
Blue
that.
Sky.
Yeah. And that was wild, because you're like seeing somebody that had already been part of this foundational, I mean, what's the word? I'm using that word too much, but basically
Nascent,
the first,
budding.
the first animated CG animated anything that was ever done theatrically, you know?
Yeah. So, because here's the thing, like when I did a little research on you, it's interesting to me that you began your career in animation with studios that were about CGI and VFX at such an early phase in that. And then, like, we would possibly expect that somebody goes in the other direction. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because a lot of it has to do with my faith in my ability to draw was low. So whenever I try to do, if I try to do hand-drawn animation, like I draw a character walking and the character would be like 1/4 the size that it was when I started. Like after 100 frames, I'm like, what happened?
You needed those 12 principles.
I did a lot of flip books. Yeah, I did a lot of flip books, and I wish I had better like guidance at the time, but I don't know, I didn't really take to it. And then when I had the ability to do computer animation, there's something about those curves and manipulating the curves, and the little engineer brain in me of like, I can see in the curves what's happening in the movement on the screen. So I understood really quickly how to refine that, even when I was just starting. So I think I had already put in my 10,000 hours, and I'm a huge believer in that everybody is putting their 10,000 hours in somewhere, sometime, somehow. But doing all those flip books and trying to do it on Super 8 and just searching and wondering and trying to figure that out, I was actually kind of eating my vegetables and doing my homework of figuring out animation, so that when I finally had the ability to get on a computer, I was like ready. And then I was like animating pills falling and toothpaste things flying and just, television commercials. But you're learning like, this is how you like go to work and meet a deadline and sit in a meeting and like just operate in the real world. And that was the beginning of that 10,000 hours,
Absolutely invaluable.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting too that you were, as you're saying, sort of learning, developing, practicing the, animation generally speaking, but it kind of centered in what was a very new form.
Yeah.
Being,
I definitely
being CGI
rode
and
the
computer-based
wave.
stuff. Yeah.
Definitely rode the wave, because in 94 and 95 is when Toy Story and Jurassic Park kind of hit. And for those two sides of the industry, that was like watershed events, basically, like the first CG computer animated feature film and the first photorealistic there goes a dinosaur. I can't tell the difference between the puppet dinosaur and the CG dinosaur. And so that's when everything kind of blew up. And that's when I went to California and went into Pixar.
What was that like for you creatively, like in terms of what you wanted to do with your skills and developing, continuously learning and developing and refining what you do as the technology is developing alongside of you? Like, were there decisions you felt you made at different times in any of these projects where you knew you were technologically sort of part of the innovation as well?
I mean, I feel like Pixar was always ahead technologically, and I was just enthralled and in wonderment of like, wow, the software is so much better than I ever thought it. Because I think that because they were kind of the very core of where all the real innovation was happening, and that outgrowth from Lucasfilm and the support, that the patience and the support behind letting that thing grow into a mature state, even in the early 90s, and the short films that were being done, they had already evolved to this place that when I sat down, I was like, oh, you guys are like killing it with your software development. And so I'm going to be a craftsman. I'm just going to do shot work, and I'm going to do the best work I can within like the boundaries that I'm given. So, and I still like to do that. In fact, I'm going back to do some freelance work for Disney soon, to be like a grunt in the trenches to do shot work again, because I think I get so much joy out of that.
Do you want to explain what shot work is?
Well, it's just, you're working on Monsters, Inc., and then they have to say goodbye in this one shot, and then you get the shot from layout, and you tear all that layout animation, which is like just robotic suggestion of like where the character should be at any time, at this certain time for the shot. And it's 187 frames long, and it's surrounded by these 2 or 3 shots before it and after it. So what is the story? After you get in, those are the boring stuff, but the interesting stuff is, what is the story? And what are we trying to say, storytelling wise? And so like in Incredibles, Bob is having this barn burner argument with his wife, Helen. And she says something to him, and he says, you know why we can't let him go out to sport, or he can't do sports? He says, why don't you let him go out for sports? And she says, you know why we can't do that? And I thought, like, he does this thing where he looks down and his hand goes up. And that's just me acting it out in my head and in the acting room, thinking like, well, that's what I would do if I was like, what the hell? And there's something about that condescending, derisive, angry thing of that arm going up. And so I blocked that, and it's like a blocking is when you just lay in your poses, and it's just, he looks down, and then I make sure the eyebrows are down so you get the gist of this emotion. And the director's like, yeah, good, keep going. Or sometimes it's like, no, he cannot be like this at all. And I've hit those before too. Sometimes I would work late into like 3 or 4 in the morning and be like, this is going to be so good. And then I go to sleep. And then in the morning we go to dailies and they're like, no, this is terrible. What are you doing? What are you doing? I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. It was late. But when you hit it, it's gratifying. And then you start building it up. And I usually build my animation from the center of mass out to the extremities, because
in the character.
Yeah. And that's a whole other talk. I could give a talk on just that. Why do you do that? It's because the extremities don't, if you move your arms like this, your center doesn't move that much. But if you move your center, then the arms are following through. it's like the heavy part first and the light parts later. It's not a rule, but it's like a guideline for me.
Well, I'm going to have to go back and watch The Incredibles and like look for you.
Yeah.
Among other films like A Bug's Life and Ratatouille that I know you also worked on when you were at Pixar. Do you find when you're doing shot work and when you're figuring out the actions and the movement for a character that you kind of do you often wind up kind of putting yourself in it because you're working out, oh, well, this is how I would say that, or this is how I would move?
Yeah. I mean, it's always connected to how you picture it in your mind's eye when you hear it, and you know all of the things that relate to it in the story. But when you hear the sound of, it's driven by the actor's recording. But usually I can see more or less what I want to do. Mm. And I think that you can put a lot of, I think the animators are like kind of like, they want a grandstand because they have this little precious piece of real estate, and they want to bring all the love and all the excitement of what they have for the shot into that shot. But when you watch the film start flowing as a whole, you realize they're all hitting it way too hard and they're grandstanding. And I think there's gestures all over the place. I'm making gestures. So, and
that's
I think
fine.
that if
you can do that here.
You can.
Look, I'm doing it too.
Yes, we're Italian. And we used to be talking with our hands a lot. But I think that you can see the result of that if the director is not aware of. Sometimes you see movies where you just see a lot of gestures one after another. And I think like at the time, in that sequence that I did for Incredibles, I feel like, I put too many gestures in there. I don't know if Brad feels that way, but I think looking back, I probably would have backed off even further. And there's some cool stuff with Harrison Ford. There's some stories about doing close-ups with Harrison Ford, and everybody on set is like, what's going on? He's not doing anything. Nothing's happening. But then you see it on the screen, and there's all this microscopic detail going on because he's minimizing. And that's why it's so watchable, because it's not yelling out at you. It's not trying so hard. It just feels real and natural, or stylized in the right way. And so I think about that stuff all the time. Is it balanced? Is it, too much? And I think a lot of directing animation is about pulling them back from doing too much. So
that is really interesting that you say that, because often when people think about animation or cartoons, the first thing that leaps to mind maybe is exaggeration.
Yeah, because animation, Tom and Jerry is like so awesome for that. Yeah. And there's always a time where you want to do a scramble. Like in Ratatouille, he's trying to get all the rats in his hat, and Linguini's trying to get all the ingredients really fast, and he's like cooking faster than any human has ever cooked. And Brad was like, faster, I want it faster. And now I look back at it and I'm like, I should have done the multiple arms thing where you actually double up. You have like one arm going and it's the same arm, but it's copied of it and going to a new place. Because if you look at a scramble from Tom and Jerry, or even from like Hanna-Barbera stuff, they'll put like multiple arms, and that's become like, that's like a nice trick that I just didn't think that was available to me at the time. But you see it from time to time, and there are animators that are really good at scrambles and really good at this explosive pyrotechnical kind of animation. And I can do that stuff. I try to be versatile, but let's face it, Doug Sweetland can run circles around me. So if you look up Doug Sweetland and you see his shots, you'd be like, that's somebody who does that kind of stuff. So I always admired that.
I wonder if those different kinds of strengths different animators has anything to do with the shots you wind up, when you're doing shot work.
Yeah.
You wind up getting assigned to do.
Yeah, I was always like the slower emotional stuff was like the heavy emotional stuff, humans doing emotional stuff. That's why Tangled, I think I was a really good fit for.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do the rats in Ratatouille because they're like, nah, I don't think so.
I'm just not a rat guy.
I mean, I think I could have worked up to it, but I didn't do any. I didn't really do any shots with him. So
Not the creative challenge you were looking for, necessarily.
no, I think I still look for it. It's just I wasn't. It wasn't my turn to do that on that project. It was all about Linguini and Colette.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Tangled. You were the animation supervisor on that, right?
Yeah.
So how different was that role for you versus other roles as an animator that you've done in any of these studios and at Disney, at Pixar, and earlier at Blue Sky?
I mean, that was me trying to hang on to my animation and also be a manager of animators.
Mm.
So we had like 55 to 80 fluctuating number of animation people on that show. And Glenn Keane was one of the supervising animators. He's incredible. And I was kind of support person on the floor, like overseeing the shot work and, making sure it gets done. And it's good and it gets fixed if it needs to be fixed. And you're coaching people and you're teaching them. But then at around 10 o'clock at night, I'm like, now I can do a shot. And then another animator, so John, can you help me with this? And I'm like, okay. So then I think you have to really give up your own dreams of doing shot work. It's like the vanity of me wanting to do shots was like, I should have just like forgotten about that and like focused on the team. And I think that's the beginning really of my 10,000 hours of like learning how to run a group of people instead of just work on your own craftsmanship. And I'm still learning that. So it's a journey.
Yeah. That sort of resonates with a lot of folks I hear, and people who teach as well. It's true for us too.
Yeah.
Okay, finally I get to work on my thing. And then it's like, well, actually you're needed to help with all these
It's not about you. Yeah, it's not about you anymore. And I think one thing I've learned as a teacher or as a guide is like, if someone asks you for help, you really have to listen real good. Stop thinking about yourself and just like, where are they right now? And just give them enough to set them in the right direction, but don't dictate 8 things to them and reconfigure their menu system or something. Like, just hold your horses and like be a guide and be generous with understanding what state of mind they're in and what they're confused about. And I think that if you can just relax and do that, you're going to get a lot. Because sometimes I think I would leave someone's desk in the earlier part of my career and they'd be like, what the hell just happened? What did this guy do? I have to put everything back the way it was. And that was bad. So I think now I'm much more respectful of like, this person everybody works in a different way. Like that's the kind of the wild thing about animation is that the way they create it is sometimes very bizarre and weird and not anything like the way you would create it.
It can be hard to meet people where they're at though, and come up with a unified looking result anyway.
I guess, yeah. It is.
I mean, don't sell yourself short. It sounds like you're doing that.
I'm trying, yeah. I'm trying. So.
And did those kinds of experiences where you went from, the directly working as an animator within a bigger team to kind of starting to manage a team, I'm guessing that maybe was part of your learning as you moved on to directing your own work.
Yeah. I mean, well, when you're really directing, then it's not just animation. It's like all the art is being created and the storyboard artists are working and you're directing actors and there's tech people there and there's a producer. Like you're outside of this like little village that you started in. You're in charge of all the villages. And I think that and then you really have to let go and like understand the totality of the project, which is your job. It's like you have a vision for the whole thing, and you don't tell the lighters where to put the lights. You say, I want this, and then they do that. You delegate. And so that's been, this is a continuous process that's happening now, where I'm pulling further and further upstream of all the processes. So it's not about lighting and animation and all that. It's about writing and the creation of the story, and what is a story, what is a midpoint, and what is a climactic ending. And I think Paperman was was like being thrown into the deep end of a very small, it's a small story, but at the time I didn't know what the hell I was going to do after the midpoint. After he starts throwing airplanes, I'm like, what am I going to do now? And it was only the pressure of production that made me figure out, like, and I look back on it in retrospect, I can talk about it like, oh yeah, and this is what it is. But I had no idea that him running across the street was like, I'm veering away from your question, by the way. But
that's fine. This is an in conversation with, it's informal.
Running across the street was him. Well, first of all, he's terrible at meeting people. He can't speak in the beginning. And then he tries to get her attention by throwing like 65,000 paper airplanes. Like, what are you doing? Go across the street and try to meet her. And so finally he does. But in order to do that, he has to give up his job and give up this suffocating environment that he thinks is important, and that's not important anymore. And it's taking a risk. It's giving something up. And then I think I got flack for like, oh, it's fate takes over at the end. It's Deus Ex Machina ending. But I'm like, yeah, but he kind of earned it. He earned the magic. So he's allowed to get swept away. But I think that what was gratifying was that all of the pieces of a feature film are actually encapsulated in Paperman, in its plot and in its story construction. And I was like, oh, that's interesting.
You didn't realize that at first?
Yeah, only in the thick of it, I'm like, I got to figure this out. But I think that's a real testament to, like, if you're working on something and you're forced to push it to a place that it has to be, you're probably going to get there. Even you may not even realize how you did it. And then when I did another project a few years later, Age of Sail, where it was about this guy with his old boat, and this girl kind of falls into his world, and he's like, I'm just off here trying to kill myself, like sailing off into the unknown, because I don't have any relevancy in the world anymore. My life is over. I don't mean anything. I'm not useful. And she's like, well, I'm useful and I want to go back. So let's do this. And as I was writing it, the sinking of the ship wasn't even like an idea. And I was one point, I was forced into a corner late at night trying to write, how does this happen? What's going to happen? Where does this go? And then it's like, then the boat sinks. I was like, oh my God, the boat, and I was very obsessed with the boat and the technology of it, and what's a Bristol channel pilot cutter. You know, it's like the Blue Nose, some smaller version of the Blue Nose. And then I would sink it. It was unthinkable to me. But then I realized, oh, this has to happen. This is where I've been forced to go, is he has to relinquish this world and be reborn, basically. And all these things are like epiphanies that they don't arrive on schedule. You're just like, I hope I can pull this one out and figure this out. And I think in Paperman, it was the same. I didn't have an ending, but I was forced to come up with something. Paperman used to be a man made of paper airplanes. He was like a Frankensteinian manifestation of all the intention of what's in the airplanes. And he was creepy. And he would fly around like the Terminator T-1000, but he would like spiral up staircases. And
that is a very different story.
He was like kind of I'm going to just bring these two people together, whether they like it or not. And it was only through, he was like an infantile, just pure intention character that didn't have any like limits, but only when he took the central red piece of paper out and like destroys himself at the end to get them to be together. And I think I showed that to some of the people at Pixar, and they were like, this is when I was developing it at Pixar, and they're like, yeah, who's this guy? He's creepy. Get rid of him. And that's when I had this I went into a depressing time where I'm like, well, if I don't have that, I don't have anything. But actually all the pieces were there to create the film in another shape. And I love that. I love that there's projects that start one way and then end up in these totally different places. Like Everything Everywhere All at Once started in a very different, you hear about it a lot. Like, oh, this was this, and it went this way, and then it just didn't, it went another way. And I think that's pretty cool.
But it's interesting when you talk about that sort of origin story of Paperman. I mean, you literally had the pieces there. You took that, character apart, basically, and turned him into the different individual airplanes that
George I guess
throws.
It was like, maybe I can make a villain or this is a misunderstood character. But what I was really avoiding was like George, the main character, he's the problem. His own tendency to not like have the bravery he doesn't like move forward in the things that he really needs to do in life. He's kind of stuck doing these like weird cowardly things. So when he finally moves forward, it's this cathartic, explosive thing of almost getting hit by cars. And that's enough. That was enough for that character to, change. And his character had an arc,
Is this the part where I bring up the fact that in reading up about you, I see somewhere that you have a credit as George in the cast of this?
Oh, yeah. That's just like ums and ahs and breaths.
Okay.
So
I was like, what?
It's a
But they don't
wordless-
speak in that film.
it's funny how like these things, they find their like home position. Like if there was no ums and ahs or breaths, you'd feel like it's a little too empty and weird.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a little bit something missing. So they're in there, and Kari Wahlgren did Meg's version of that. Like just that one little thing, you can tell if it's a man or a woman doing that. And like she was like cast as that girl, and they're very mixed. They're mixed way down, but they're enough to give you that sense of like, oh, these are real breathing people.
Mm. Do you find does sound sometimes inform what you do in the animation at all?
I mean, the Paperman's not really about the sound. It's about that white noise of being up in those spaces between buildings sonically. But it's really about the music. The music is like a whole... I was hunting around for what is this going to be that takes... What is going to give you this feeling of inevitability and magic and power that's going to take you through to the very end. And I had this temp track on it by it'll come to me. And I played it for Chris Beck, the composer, and he's like, after 2 seconds, he's like, I got it. Okay. And it was very modern. It was Goldfrapp. It was called A&E is the name of the track. And there's an instrumental version of it. If you hunt it down on YouTube, you find it. And if you listen to it, you're like, yes, that's the vibe. And it's very contemporary. And then he went away. So I played that for him, and he's like, I got it. And he vanished for like 2 months. And I was like, where is this thing? Where is this thing that's going to wrap it all together and tie it all up with this feeling of magic and inevitability and wonder, and it's going to propel you to the end of to the destination of these two people. And then he sent me a demo of it one day, finally, with like nothing, just like on flash drive or something, and I played it in my car. I was like, yes, this is so good, because it was a period piece, but I think it took it into this kind of 21st century texture that I really liked a lot. And then the sound designer had done all this work for the entire thing, and I said, well, we're basically doing a music video here, so I'm sorry, but we're going to mix this down to absolutely zero. So there's no sound effects after that music starts.
Yeah.
And that's some of the kind of heartbreaking things you have to decide on. All this work is going to go out the window. But we all learned.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, that film, like, obviously has a very mid-century sort of feel in its aesthetic.
Yeah.
It's in black and white. And yet the process behind making it was anything but. It sounds like there's hand drawing in there, but it's not. There are other, a lot of your sort of CGI background, I think, seems like comes into the construction of that film too.
Yeah. I mean, it was...
If you feel like talking about that.
Well, it was like being around Glenn Keane. He was drawing every day, and you watch all these drawings as he's drawing over the people's animation on this like tablet. And then those drawings just went away. They'd vanish. They're not part of the final product. And you see that raw texture, the tangible quality of the hand of the artist is always in that. You see it very often in the pre-production artwork, and then you get to the final version, and even in hand-drawn animation, the roughs to me are much more interesting. The energy in them, or the energy of a Degas sketch, is better than a finished Degas painting to me. And although he's really good at keeping the energy, but hanging on to that texture, I think, is exciting to me. So that was, we would do the CG animation first, and then we would actually light it and get the tones right. Then it would go to the final line, and the 2D artists would do their magic, and then we kind of glue it onto the surface, and the image itself would drag the lines along with it. It was more complicated than that, but that's the simple description.
It's a good summary.
But and when we started doing that, a lot of the production people were like, the word on the street, like in the studio, is like, yeah, that movie, that's what's going on. They're going backwards. They light, and then they go backwards into 2D anime, and then they go to this. And so they're like, this is not a show you want to be on. They don't know what they're doing. And then the final shots would start appearing in this, like, they had this system where all the most recent renders of the shots would appear on the website, on the internal website. And then people would start stopping me in the halls like, I know what you're doing there, and that's cool. And then there was like, that's the show you want to be on. Everybody wanted to be on it. So that was very gratifying, because I'm like, yes, it's working, because it so easily could have not worked at all. You know, it could have gone off into some other direction where it was way more difficult. It was already hard enough, but...
Well, if it's going to be hard anyway, you might as well take a giant creative risk, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the value of taking that kind of creative risk, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a beautiful film.
It looked really nice. Yeah. I look back on it, and it's like, this worked out really nicely. Because it wasn't just the line. It was like the highlights and the shadow and the transitions between them are also drawn. Sorry, do we have to shift?
There's so much more I want to ask, but I'm aware of the time, and I know you might want to get to some questions. Yeah, of course. Yeah. No problem. God, I've got a million more questions, but you know.
Okay, one more, and then we'll do Q&A.
No, because they're going to lead to like 5 others. So,
okay.
You know, we can talk more later. But I will just say that I think it's, I think what you're doing with film, particularly using animation being so visual in its own way, separate from live action film, is really important to that kind of storytelling too. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, good. Creative risks. And
well, it's
animation.
nice that animation is starting to look different, like Spider-Verse and Alberto Miego stuff, and I think Nimona, when that comes out, you'd be like, this looks different. And that's exciting to me, because I think there's a tendency for them to all start looking the same. So.
Yeah, you got to take the risk and catch people's attention.
Yeah.
I assume I'm not the only one with questions here, so we can take questions from those of you in attendance. If anybody has any thoughts or questions that they want to share.
I have a quick question. Can you speak a little bit, because students ask about this, the transition from Canada to the States and how that went for you? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I'm American, so coming up here was a very exotic, weird thing that no one understands why I did that. But I understand it, because when I came here, it was November, and it was like the wind was howling down, Granville, and I was like, yeah, this is where I need to be. Like I'm wearing all black, and I'm like rolling drum already, and like
I can be really intense here as an artist.
And it was the 80s, man. No, it was like it was just a place where I felt like, oh, I'm way off on the edge of the world here. And then you go into this building, and there's like the steam heaters, and it's all funky and uneven, and it's like a rabbit warren of like weird people doing cool stuff. And that's where I needed to be. So that was my transition here was like instantaneous decision. Yes, I have to go here. But then when I came back, I think I came back home to live at home. That was a challenging, summer and fall was like, I don't know what, because there's like nobody doing computer animations, like barely. And the groups that were doing that were very small and insular, and they were just starting, and they didn't have a lot of, it was just the beginning. It was tough. So, but yeah, I had a good time here.
I could see though how that being in that sort of very small group of people, like you're saying, just starting doing this kind of animation.
Yeah.
Immediately in my head, I had this image of like how Nova Scotia is on like the edge of a continent too.
Yeah.
We're sort of on our own little edge out here too. Maybe there's something in the psychology of that, or in
Could be
the fact that you tried so many different things here and were able to try so many different things that gave you this sort of found. I'm tell me if I'm wrong, but this is, and I'm also projecting my experience as a student here too. So full disclosure, but being willing to, or learning to be willing to take those risks in so many different areas.
Yeah.
I wonder if that influenced your relative comfort with that kind of creative risk taking later on.
Yeah, I think also it just like I would be down metalsmithing and using the drill press, and now I have like a full machine shop. So like I didn't understand at the time these pathways that I was going to go down, but I was already getting a pretty good education in like the basics of like filing, which is like sounds like such a simple thing, but it's such a fundamental thing of just cutting metal is something that I now understand much better. And it was the same with like color theory or composition or photography, sculpture or painting. And they keep kind of looping around, as I said earlier, which is really gratifying. So,
well, I mean, all those, you can see all of that, how all that would be useful in something like Paperman, for example.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sculpture in sort of doing the 3-dimensional stuff. There's lighting, as well as the drawing and the movement.
Yeah, and there's like a million little details. So any of these disciplines that you go down, you're like, what's the secret? There's no secret to acting or animation or metalsmithing. It's like 10,000 things. You're constantly this diffused decision. It's like being a chef or something. Like when I see Gordon Ramsay working and scrambling eggs, it's like this just one of the 10,000 details he has in his head that bring it to a certain quality level that he's trying to achieve. And it's the same with animation. It's like we're talking about the medical profession too, of like doctor has 10,000 like encyclopedic stuff going on that feeds this discipline. And I don't know. I felt like NSCAD helped me understand that. The only thing I didn't like about it was like you go into that library and there'd be art forum sitting there. And I would open art forum. I'd be like, hey, this is cool. I should read this. And it was like the most opaque, like coded, it was like, you cannot understand this world because you cannot understand the coded book. And it took me years to, and then the gallery scene in Soho was still thriving at that time. So I went back to New York, and all the galleries moved pretty quickly to Chelsea. But that was going full tilt in like 86 to 90. And I really thought that was important. And now I'm like, that was not important. Art forum was not important. And I just have a lot more understanding of like what they're trying to do in the art world versus like what I wanted to do with my work. Does that make, like, I felt like there were goals being put out there that I thought were things that I should be chasing. But now I realize, oh no, I shouldn't have gone anywhere. That's not important.
I think that speaks to there's not really a one size fits all formula when you're,
Yeah. I mean,
getting your education in art.
Yeah.
It's really idiosyncratic, and you're sort of forging the path as you go. You're not following a path necessarily.
Yeah. But I think like Richard Serra or Jeff Koons are like, they're cut out to like, they understand that world so they can go into it and navigate it each in their own way. But that's not where I was going at all. And that's okay.
Yeah. We already have them. Now we have you too.
Yeah. But I do find that the art forum thing, making it feel so important to me. I don't know why the conditions around that time made me feel like, oh, this is the publication that like has the key to some answer to what is art. But now I'm like, it had no answers at all. So, at least for me. For some people, probably. But.
Wonderful. Further questions? Yeah, over here.
I was going to ask, can you talk about moving from working on a film set to directing your own animation and how you did that and what it's like?
Should we repeat the questions for the recording?
The transition from moving from a film set to directing my own stuff. I think I talked a little about it, but it does get back to that idea of like, you're in your hole doing your stuff and you love every little detail of it. And you have an understanding of the details that even the director doesn't really need to know about. Like when a dog starts walking, which leg goes first? And you have to know that stuff. You have to figure it out. But the director is like, what's the dog thinking and how does it connect to the next shot? And I think Quentin Tarantino has an interview where he's like, it's not your job to know how to light things or how to like make sets or props. It's not your job to know how to make the costumes and sew them together. It's your job to have he's saying it in his Quentin Tarantino-y ferocious way, but he's right. It's like, you need to have a vision for what you want to see and where you want to take this project, and I think that's the understanding of like, you are being delegated to do this wonderful jewel of a part of a project, and that's your thing. That's your job. Or you are the one saying, go make these jewels and we'll put them all together into this amazing thing. But I think that Tarantino thing comes from it's an earlier interview of some director saying like, I think you should put the key light here and put these barn doors on it and then a cookie here and then a backlight. And it might have been Greg Toland or some cinematographer. He's like, tell me what you want and we'll make it look that way. What do you want to see? And that's the same message of like, it's not, it's the understanding what your role is in those two places. Like as a director, you're supposed to delegate and explain. That's why directors are just explaining stuff and making decisions all day. But as an animator, you're not explaining anything. You're just making your own internal decisions about this nugget that you're trying to craft, you know. That's probably not even answering your question. So.
We can do one more question.
I think there is one back here.
Sort of just piggybacking off that, look, when it comes to co-directing feature-length animation, look, what is that division of labor looking like for you? Is it like, are you the more detail-oriented side of the directing with the animation background, or like what's the prep into production and prep into production and voice recording? What's that division of labor look like as a collaboration?
Can I just say I'm really glad you asked that, because like that was a question I had and we didn't get to it. So
the question is, what's co-directing, basically, for animation. And I think if you look at like the last 10 Disney features or Pixar features, you find that there's 2 directors or more. And a lot of that has to do just with the limit. There's literally only so many hours in the day to sometimes if you have a review session and there's 100 animators on your team, I don't know what the math is on that, but like 5 hours later, you could still not be through the entire review. So you have to split the workload between more than one person very often, because it's just not physically possible to like review everything. And a lot of that is like the lieutenants that you appoint to kind of manage those groups are also really important. But for co-directing, like with Glenn, I had already worked with him. That was on Over the Moon we're talking about. I had already worked with him on Tangled, so I knew like, this is his vibe. This is what he goes for. It's all about the eyes. That's like a basic thing. That's where anyone is looking. When you watch a movie, you're looking at the eyes, whether it's animation or live action. So you better put your work into the eyes. The finger or the pinky can be turned this way or that, but it doesn't really matter as much as the eyes, not even nearly a quarter as much. So I don't know how I got on that tangent, but yeah, it's more about the division of labor. The eyes are important, but it's about the division of labor and how much time there is in the day, and just how busy and complex animated features are. And just there's so many people working on them. There's so many reviews to do, so many decisions to be made. And that's where the co-director thing comes in handy.
So you're both kind of across everything?
In the case of Over the Moon, I wasn't really, because Glenn is such an amazing draftsman. He actually storyboarded whole sequences himself, which is awesome. And he was kind of running the front end with the transition from script into storyboarding. He was really closely connected to that. But with animation, we were kind of sharing it 50-50. And then with lighting, Celine Derimo, who's Canadian, is awesome. She was kind of directing the lighting, but I did a lot of the color correction, post-production stuff, the HDR post-production stuff I was doing as well. So it's just kind of where you're more comfortable. Plus, I came into the show a little bit later, so a lot of the sequences were already through boarding. I'd really like layout. Layout is kind of like the unsung hero of how movies get made, because, and honestly, the storyboard artists are the ones kind of creating the shots out of nothing, out of their own ideas, out of their brains. And that's really exciting. But then when it goes into layout, it's like, is it clear in layout? Can you understand the story? Does it cut properly? Like, are you meeting all of these standards for how a film functions? And if you do, then keep going, go into animation. But if it's not working in layout, then it's like, you better get on it and like make it cut properly. And a lot of the craftsmanship of layout, to me, comes out of watching Lee Unkrich and editing at Pixar. Like the integrity of the cuts and the eye lines of the cuts are like really cool, watching him like hold everybody to a really high standard. that was not. I ended in a weird place.
Dun-dun-dun.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, okay. Well, then I will just say and hear you talk about that. You know, there's a lot of learning on the fly. It sounds like you did from observing other people's jobs, and while absolutely important not to micromanage a production, it sounds like learning by watching editors, for example, informed what you could do in layout,
Yeah.
and that kind of learning. You're learning from everywhere all the time.
I'm so sorry to do this,
Yeah.
but the next panel
Yes.
is going to be starting
Yeah.
soon.
Okay.
I actually would like to just take this moment to thank John and Becca for a really interesting conversation. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.